Welcome to episode 4 of the Reimagine Mental Health podcast. Today, we sat down and spoke with Ella Hale, who many of you remember as one of the most prominent mental health advocates that the province has had in the last 3 years. Her story and her advocacy journey began in spring of 2021 when her, along with others in the local Victoria area, spoke about their experiences at Royal Jubilee Psychiatric Emergency Services.
Ella is so inspiring, so refreshing. She is so well spoken, and her work is just, making waves on Vancouver Island and beyond. And we're just thrilled to have her talk about what it was like to be at Royal Jubilee and the subsequent advocacy work that she has done that has reached over 1,800 people in her Facebook group. So Ella Hale is a person with lived and living experience of mental illness, but she is also a university student who is planning to go into the mental health field.
Ella co-founded an advocacy Facebook page where she provided a space for individuals who had been to the psychiatric emergency services within Island Health to share their personal experiences there. Through that page, she's continued to advocate, but more importantly, she's felt the sense of community and connection that she was missing for so much of her life.
And as usual, the nature of this conversation can be a little sensitive and a little heavy. So please do what you need to take care of yourself. And we would really appreciate any reviews you have for the show. We're trying to get this train moving and build momentum. So if you could please rate and review our podcast, share it, listen. And if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, you can reach out to us at bcmentalhealth.advocates@gmail.com. With that said, enjoy episode 4. We hope you come back for more.
So Ella, it's an honor to have you on the podcast today. You've been a beacon of hope for many, I think, both those that are youth in the province as well as older people in the world of mental health. The first time that I had the pleasure of meeting you was back in the spring of 2021, and instantly when I met you, I knew that that you were going to move some mountains. I think that you've just got that attitude, you've got the right energy, and from then on, I think you've forged this path, which has been absolutely incredible, and you've brought a lot of different people's stories to the fore in the BC mental health landscape. And so I just want to start off by saying thank you for taking time to be here with us to chat. And I know that we're gonna have a great conversation here. But yes, I just want to go back to where sort of all of this began for you on your journey through mental health challenges, through advocacy, and then I want to at the end talk a little bit about where you're moving to. But just give us a sense of sort of what your experience was like as a young person in British Columbia seeking mental health support.
Yeah, thank you for all those kind words. Yeah, so I struggled with my mental health for the first time, I would say around the age of 12. And by the time I was 13, 14, I got admitted to the hospital for the first time. And I remember being like instantly overwhelmed. It was so intense and so many new faces, so many new people trying to help and figure out what was going on. But it was all coming from like a positive place and all very supportive and had this very like familial holistic view on health and really supported not only myself but my family. So from the age, I would say about 14 to 16, I was in and out of hospital. I probably like a dozen times. I spent a summer in an inpatient psychiatric hospital called Ledger House. And again, just like that wraparound support for not only me, but my mom and my dad and my brothers. So yeah, it started with that. I was also accessing outside counseling. So in Victoria, especially specifically, we have like inpatient for youth that goes up to the age of 17, and then outpatient is the age up to 19. So I was still an outpatient when I switched over to accessing the adult system. So it was like very weird being in this system where they looked at your family, and I was doing family therapy, to going and being alone in a hospital at the age of 17 with a bunch of adults. And I think they do. I like to believe that they try to do the best that they can with the resources they have. But there just wasn't that like family piece, and there wasn't that aspect of like, okay, how do we connect all these resources together to help support this youth? I was very much viewed as an adult at the age of 17, which was insane. I was still in high school. I was like having all these hormones and going through all these issues and needed that perspective, but there just wasn't that within the system that I was in.
Oh, incredible. And so when you got into the adult system, what was sort of the first warning sign that things weren't really going to be the same here as maybe in the youth system?
Yeah, I think the biggest shock was the amount of time that they spent with you and the amount of time you actually spent in the hospital. I remember when I first went to the hospital the very first time in the pediatric system, I spent probably about a week in hospital, and I would see a child and youth counselor every day. I would see a social worker. I would see a doctor, a psychiatrist. I would go and do stuff. I would have people coming in to see me. There was like very much this like forward momentum, and it was for a duration that I felt I could stabilize and feel safe and reintegrate back into the community. And I remember it must have been 2020, so COVID just happened. So I mean, that's going on in the hospitals, of course. And I had a pretty serious attempt, and I think I spent like less than 72 hours. They medically stabilized me, and then they're like, okay, you can leave now. And I remember just being like, oh my God, like this intense thing just happened. I like was at the lowest part of my life. Obviously, like if somebody is attempting suicide, they're not in a great mindset, and you think that that mindset has like shifted in 72 hours. And I remember being discharged and just, I think just in shock that that all happened, and there's no processing, nothing, and there's no connection to like outside resources except for like sending my discharge paper to my family doctor. But it was just, I think that was the biggest like, oh my goodness, like they are just here purely in a medical lens. They're not looking for stabilization long term. They're not looking for a continuum of care. They're like, you come with this problem, we'll fix that problem and send you home. Nothing else. Don't expect that.
Wow, it really strikes me, Ella. I can relate on a different level. I was admitted when at the age of 20. I was, treated with like 10-minute doctor interviews occasionally, like not even every day. I didn't get to see the doctor, and there was no therapy. There was really no supports, especially in the ICU in Kelowna and especially in the emergency units. It was like literally they would hand me a magazine for the whole day, and I was just dying of boredom. But I wanted to ask you about the inpatient experience that you had at, I think you said Ledger House.
Yeah.
As a youth, can you tell me a bit about what that was like?
Yeah. I think when I was a youth, I did not appreciate it as much as I do now. But yeah, so Ledger is an inpatient assessment and then treatment facility. So they do a bunch of like psychoanalyzing testing. They do a bunch of like group work. So they have a pottery group, they have an occupational therapist who does a drumming group, and they have like bouldering, yoga. They have a garden. You go on a whole bunch of outings, and you just spend your days like in a little unit that's kind of homey. Like you watch TV, you hang out with other youth, you do like group activities and stuff, and then you get that one-to-one support when needed, and you see a psychiatrist every couple days. I think the really great thing about that was the piece of like medication was looked at not in like the whole picture, and it wasn't like that's the only reason why you're here is to get on this medication, but going through a med trial in a stabilized environment was definitely helpful. And then there's still like friends to this day that I met in Ledger that we still have a relationship. And it's, yeah, I think it's that piece where like you don't know why other people are there, you don't know their story, and that's not why you're there. You're not there to like fix anybody else but yourself, but that like, okay, we're all in this together, we're going through different things, but this common understanding that like we're all trying to get to a place where we're not right now.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And I mean, just thinking about the ability to provide activities to do for people, and things that are going to be calming, and things that are going to allow people to get hopefully, away from where they're sort of at mentally, and think about, put their mind onto something else. I think that sounds aspirational, to be honest, for mental health in general.
Yes.
I know you and I have had many conversations about your experience with not only the hospital staff in Royal Jubilee Pez, but also the administrators, and something that was very stark, almost comical, was this term of service users. So the sort of adult system calling patients coming in service users. I mean, what is that indicative of to you in terms of the adult system? What does that say about it?
Yeah, it's very transactional, right? Like, we are there to serve a need, and our need is to keep people having jobs, right? And I think it's this weird, I'm taking a lot of Indigenous courses right now, so that's always in my forefront. But it's this very like Eurocentric way of like, we live in this individualistic society where there isn't that commonality of like, I'm here as an individual showing up, and yes, you have a job, but like, we can coexist without this like weird transaction or hierarchy or stuff. And I think, I mean, it comes with being a kid and like adults being authority figures anyways, and that just kind of being understood. But when you're entering a system where everybody is so much older than you, you're like, okay, how do I exist within this space? And it definitely does feel like they are trying to get you in and get you out as quick as possible with as least amount of work as possible. And I'm not going to sit here and like blame individual people, because I think like the system as a whole, like, it's figuring out mental health within a medical setting, which we know like it doesn't work. Like, you can't look at it through that lens. And I think that's where it kind of goes wrong, is you can't do that. And as long as we keep looking at it that way, it's going to feel transactional, and it's not going to be like, it's not a money producing environment, right? We need to produce wellness, and we need to produce holistic, is that a word? Holisticality? Yeah, sure, it's a word now, but we need to produce those sort of things. And I don't think, as long as we're looking and saying like service user, I don't think there's a way that can exist.
I think that's a really, really beautiful point that you just made. And it kind of reminds me of my experience being a young woman in these adult wards in Kelowna, where first I couldn't find a bed in the regular ward because there were so many people that, that wanted the free food and housing, to be honest. Like, people were wanting to be in the regular ward because it was better than other places. And so there was no beds in the regular ward. So when I was in ICU, I wasn't allowed outside, and it was really hard for me to be indoors. But I noticed that my positionality as a young woman was very uncomfortable with the men that were in the ward. Like, I was at one point like being like sexually stalked by like one of the guys. Not like he didn't do anything, but he was like preying on me a little bit, like from the walk arounds. And I was just like, where do I go? Like, and the nurses were like, you're safe, and I'm like, it's not safe here. Like, this guy is like following me and like making like sexual comments. Like, this is really not safe. So I'm just wondering, what was it like for you as a young woman in the system? And I read some of the advocacy articles that you got incredible coverage on, and your advocacy work is so incredible. But one of the things that struck me was what that female psychiatrist said to you about it just being hormones, or that you'd feel better at 25, that your dad wouldn't care. Like, can you talk a bit about what this was like for you?
Yes, I for sure can. It's actually interesting. So the first time that I went to Royal Jubilee Hospital, I did not go through Pez. I went straight up to a medical ward. So I went from the ER to a medical ward. And then the second time I came in, I went right to the psych emerge, and super similar experience. I had this individual, and I don't think he was meaning to create harm, but he was intoxicated or detoxing. And he just looked at me and he's like, you're too pretty to be in the psych ward. And he was like 60 something. I mean, I have no judgment of age, but I was like, okay. And I was like, this is terrifying, because all the nurses and faculty are like behind a glass door. I'm like, they're not here to keep me safe. Like, that glass is not to keep us safe. That's to keep them safe. And But yeah, no, definitely relate to that. And that time in the hospital was the same time. Yeah, that psychiatrist, I spent the entire night in the hospital, and then in the morning, probably like 8 a.m. or whatever, they wake you up at an ungodly hour because of course you don't need sleep when you're struggling with your mental health. That's not a priority. But she brought me into this room, and she would not sit beside me. She sat on like the furthest possible way on this like huge long conference table, like me, little like 17-year-old, not that scary. And I just remember I didn't feel like she was talking to me. I felt like she was talking at me. And I remember like staring out the window of Pez and like looking at the school, and she being like, "Oh yeah, you're looking at that school, like my kids go there." And just like so far removed from the reality I was in. And I think I obviously like stopped opening up to her, because if you're having a conversation with somebody and they're not engaged, you're not going to be like talking to her. And then I have had a up and down relationship with my dad, and I think she thought I was there because of him, and I was like trying to like prove something to him. And so she looks at me and she goes like, "You're just a teenager, you'll be fine when you're 25, like don't try to kill yourself, like your dad's not going to care if you do, like your mom and your grandma might, but like your dad's not going to care." So like basically insinuating that the only reason why I'm here is because of all these external things. There isn't any way like me at, I guess I would have been 17 at that time, could have anything wrong with me that would need psychiatric help. Like it's just all these external things, which is a perspective. But I'm like, regardless of why I'm there, like I'm there and I need care and I need help and I'm asking for it, and you're going to send me away. It was quite shocking.
Wow, unbelievable. I mean, I think Ella, in many ways, you really, your stories, your ability to communicate, which is exceptional, like extraordinary, and the power of the words that you use. I'm just in awe, and I'm tremendously will forever be in awe of you, as someone that really, I think, for me, kind of broke the seal on Royal Jubilee Pez, and kind of opened a lot of people's eyes in the public to this world, at Pez, but also across mental health institutions in British Columbia, to say, wake up, everyone. Things are not right at these institutions. Things are not going well. There's inappropriate behavior. There's emotional abuse. There's all sorts of extraordinary things going on in those facilities that are violating people's fundamental rights, even. Just can you bring us from that time when you're at potentially your worst, and you're in Pez, and you're experiencing this, if you want to use the island health terminology, global service, up until this time in spring 2021, when you are kind of the pioneer of the mental health advocacy movement on Vancouver Island, and really you, along with Emma Epp, are carrying the flag. What did that transition look like?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a conversation about this not too long ago, and I think something that I was not aware of at the time is the amount of pressure that it was, because we had like 10 to 15 people reaching out to us a day telling us like the most horrific thing that happened to them and this trauma. And oh my goodness, okay, my cat is gonna want in. We're gonna a little meowing.
I love cats. Cats are the best. They make life better.
Oh, I think they do too. Okay. I'm going to give you guys some fun editing. Okay. What was the question? Can you restate it?
Sorry. This is a great interlude to the conversation, I have to say. I guess what did the transition really look like from having these experiences at Pez, which were just horrible, traumatic, like really, really terrible, things that in some ways could even be worse than what you were there for, perhaps, and in some ways didn't help whatsoever. How does that transition look from being there and having these experiences into being the foremost kind of commentator on mental health advocacy, at least on Vancouver Island, but probably province wide at that time?
Yeah. Pressure. Yeah, I think at the time I didn't realize how much pressure it was. And I think the thing that I was cautious of while going through that was this idea, like, I was still very much in the thick of my mental health, but I had this perception that in order to like be an advocate and be whole, and you couldn't still be struggling. And I think like oftentimes I look back at like these interviews or around the same time, like there's the connection project and stuff, and just like looking, be like, oh my goodness, like I was sitting there being like, I'm so well, and I was like struggling so much. And but people were coming to us, and people were looking to us for support, and looking to us as these people who went through the system and survived and recovered, that I couldn't not be well. And then on top of that, I was sitting there like having a web page that was like a pathetic excuse for support. I couldn't then go to that place and be like, hey, I know I'm like ripping you to shreds on a Facebook page, but like, hey, can you help me? Like I think I understood that I just like did not allow myself to not be well. But yeah, it was definitely a lot. And I think it really like pushed me to recovery, whether I was like ready for it or not. I think it helped me go down that way. And now like a little bit more separated from it. It's a little quieter, not as many interviews and people reaching out and podcasts. It's definitely some time for like some self-reflection and understanding of everything that's happened over the last couple of years.
Wow, I'm really struck by that. And I'm struck by the age that you were when all of this was going down. You were 19, right?
18.
You were 18.
Yeah.
And you were going to meetings with the ministers of this province advocating for better mental health care. And they were like really like 1,800 people in your Facebook group that was about so PES as a non-form, like I didn't grow up on the island, so PES stands for Psychiatric Emergency Services.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious because it's a not service, so I love that you renamed it Pathetic Excuse for Service, because it really, that's so apt and so accurate. But I'm really struck by what you said about the truth of how you were doing, even while this like spark and this fire was emerging to be an advocate, to work in this field. Yeah, can you tell us a bit more about like what your life is like now? And yeah, as you're in that self-reflection, what are your goals for the future in terms of your work?
Yeah. I feel like the more school I do, the less I have any idea of what I want to do. But I guess it's about the journey, not the destination. I think oftentimes when I would like go to these meetings, I'd be speaking and I would be feeling something internally so different. I would often be like, oh, well, I'm just lying to everyone around me, or I'm lying to myself or whatever. And I think I've tried to look at it now, like I have this ability to articulate and speak on topics that other people can't, or other people aren't in the place in their life where they're able to, or they don't have the resources to, or they don't have the positionality that I do. They don't have the privilege I do. And I think like instead of looking at me speaking while also super struggling as this like bad thing and I'm not being authentic, more looking at it as like, okay, that's like this strength that I hold, and how can I utilize that to my advantage? And I don't know what work that will do in the future, but I think definitely something where I'm able to use my voice and help elevate those around me, because that's essentially what I was trying to do. And with this whole Facebook page and M and I's whole goal, we're just like giving people a space where they felt safe and a space to tell their story in a non-judgmental way, where they weren't faced with the like, are you sure this is how it went down? So it's something like that in work. And I always balance of like, do I want to stay on the island and work within Island Health despite knowing the flaws that exist within their system, and having this like understanding that like the system, how it's set up, is not beneficial for a lot of people, and how do you create good within a corrupt system? So navigating that. Hopefully in the next 2 years of school, I'll figure out, but we'll see.
As you said throughout this whole journey, Ella, I mean, you've connected with dozens, possibly hundreds of people in in-person conversations. Me mentioned a few there. So John Horgan, as well as the Minister for Mental Health and Addictions at the time, Sheila Malcolmson. But I know also a lot of other MLAs had conversations with you, hospital facilities, their administration did, island health authorities. I mean, going through all those conversations, as you say, you're a great speaker. You're able to connect the dots. You're able to give a voice to those that haven't had that. And I'm just wondering, throughout all of that, what was the nature of the interaction, I suppose, sort of like with a lot of those people that hold real high positions of power? I know Adam Olsen even went into the legislature and tabled and talked about the Facebook page, and even provided some insight into some of the people's stories that he posted on that page. I mean, what were those conversations like? I imagine they were quite varied, but if you can give us a little insight into how they played out.
Yeah, I think, oh my goodness. Okay, this is gonna be an issue.
Cats are welcome. Cats are welcome in the interview. We love them.
I feel like he needs to be in the interview. My mom got him when I was in the hospital, and she thought he would like cure my depression. So he's like my depression cat. I don't think he cured my depression, but he definitely supports me in my manners. But yeah, I think it was very interesting. Again, like hindsight, I think is super important when looking at these sort of things. And like in conversations with MLAs like Adam Olsen, and as you say, you can tell when somebody's like genuine. And I think when you're like in the thick of it and trying to manage all these people's emotions and what they want to handle, you kind of get lost in it. But like people like Adam Olsen, where they would sit down and they would listen, and we had like so many conversations, and they offered us so many resources, and also like channeled the things we were talking about in meetings. It felt very genuine. And then in a lot of other meetings that we were in, it was like, okay, we're going to do this because they're on the news and they're not making us in a good light, and we need to have these conversations to please them. And I remember we would have like bi-weekly meetings with the hospital administration, and like I can't even remember like all these important people. And I remember like being in therapy and my therapist being like, I work for your organization and I like Island Health, and I haven't even met these people. Like, this is crazy. But they would keep meeting with us as long as like we were agreeable. And as long as when they came to us with something, we were like, oh yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. And I remember like we had this one story come in, and this psychiatrist told this like 19-year-old girl that if she wanted to kill herself, she would have to do something better than try to cut herself. And we, like me and Emma, were so fuming from hearing that story, because we're like that is a vulnerable person coming to receive help, and your staff, a psychiatrist who's supposed to be like this amazing mental health professional who's supposed to know like all of this, is literally telling a 19-year-old girl like do better, basically. And I remember like sending that email. It was probably like 2 a.m. that we like sent that email to these people, and like being like, if she goes home and she harms herself, like that's on you and that's on your staff. Like this is the like situation that you're putting her in. And we received an email back that was basically like, do not blame us for that. Like, we can't take responsibility. I'm like, well, then who is? Because this is your staff hired under your like organization. And I think after that, like a couple of days later, they moved the meetings to ad hoc, and we were basically like on the outside. So it's very interesting that as long as you stay with the status quo and you agree to what they're telling you they're doing and how they're doing it, and that they're seeing results and they're going through these trainings, and you just smile and nod, we could stay in the room. And then as soon as we push back, like they weren't there. And it's very reflective that leadership thinks that way, and then that's kind of gets tracked down through the organization.
It's so interesting, this dynamic, I think, between the bureaucracy on the one hand, and you and Emma, and this coalition of voices that is behind you talking on social media. And it's, I always find it interesting in terms of the communications on these things. I mean, this, in some ways, Island Health, it really kind of struck a nerve with them. I mean, they went so far as to launch, and I think you would agree with me that it hasn't gone far enough, but they launched the Psychiatric Emergency Services and Acute Care Improvement Project in 2021. But they also went on the record so much to say that, without naming you and Emma specifically, to say, and this is blasted all across all sorts of communications within Island Health. In the spring of 2021, patients dissatisfied with their care they experienced through PES at Royal Jubilee shared their concerns on social media and traditional media. And then that was a launch point for them to go into this improvement project, which they talk about. I mean, do you have any sort of sense, as you've said, you've been kind of put on the outside here. Do you have any sort of sense as to whether there have been material improvements made at PES, not just specifically at Royal Jubilee, but at other facilities?
Yeah, I think it was easier to keep track of these things when we were receiving an influx of stories like every single day of people like that went that evening. And I mean, I haven't been in 3 years, so I'm only speaking from what I've heard from other people. But I think we know like the medical system is still so overwhelmed, and we know that burnout is so like drastically high across healthcare professionals. And I think that's still translating and impacting patients in a negative way. And I'm not hearing it as much, and not to the same extent, and not, I think, as obvious, but I do think it's still existing within the ways of like, people are going to the hospital because you're always told like that is where you go when you need help. That if all else fails and nobody else can help you, the hospital can help you, right? Like Canada's put on this pedestal of like, we have a great healthcare system, like all these like external factors that contribute. So that's the narrative you have if you haven't been in the system, and then you go and everything is not as it seems. And I think that's still happening. I think people don't realize that they have a voice, and I think people often too are just in such a state of crisis that there's not that understanding that this care you're receiving is not okay, and you're allowed to be like, hey, you can treat me with some respect, but there's like that power difference, right? So I don't know if things are much better or we're just not hearing about it as much. Like I mentioned previous, I think as long as management is contributing to this narrative, like your staff isn't going to treat people with the same. And I really wholeheartedly, even the psychiatrist that said all those awful things, like I don't think she ever went into this field with the intention of like, and this like bad mindset or whatever. I think she's just burnt out, and she's not receiving the support from management, and she's not receiving the support from policies, and like there's not that care for their own staff, so they're not able to care for people. And so yeah, I don't know if it's any better. I think it probably is in ebbs and flows. And I think too, the thing that I've had to realize is like, I come into the system with like an immense amount of privilege. Like I'm white, I'm female, I'm cisgendered. I don't face a lot of forms of discrimination, and I still had a horrible experience. And I can't imagine like the voices that we aren't hearing. Like, what are those stories? Like who are these people that aren't able to reach out on social media, who will never tell their story because they don't have social media or they don't have a support system? My head always goes there because I'm like, there's other people out there as well.
There are, and I think there's like what you say is so, there's themes emerging from, our last conversation with Rob, I just attended the Care Not Cops Abolitionist Healthcare Convergence, which was all about taking police out of healthcare settings. The laws, the legislation are written in power structures as a woman of color and, an immigrant family. the amount of violence that I received was like really shocking. And nobody heard me for 10 years, right? Because, first of all, I felt like anything I said would be used against me, right? Like if I said something openly and honestly, they'd be like, oh, you're mentally ill. So nothing you say is credible. And that's something that women have been told throughout history is like, you're crazy, you're emotional, you're hormonal, what you're experiencing is not real, right? And the the things that have happened in our system that have gone undercover, like underswept under the rug. And in Kyle's article, all these crazy stats of how staff are not adhering to the legislation, like to the reporting, to the, and then doing crazy violent things against people's human rights. Like, it is the reality, and it's not everyone's experience through the hospital. Some few people I have met have said, oh yeah, I was treated great, I got the thing I needed, this doctor was really sweet, I felt better afterwards, great. But we don't hear the data on that. It's not put out there. So I guess my question to you, Ella, is do you think that our mental health care system is worth saving? And if it isn't, what could we do instead?
Oh, I think it's always hard because as much as I'm like, the system isn't useful and it's not helping people, there is a time and a place for everything, right? Like there have definitely been times, even within my own journey, that I was not safe to be outside of a locked room, and I would be just like running away as far as I could. And without people keeping me locked up and without being under legislation, I probably wouldn't be here, right? Like there was things that were in place to keep me safe. And at the same time, it's so corrupt. Like we have this legislation, as you mentioned, that's dictating what is happening and nobody's following it. And then there's no accountability, and there's accountability on like no level at all. Like I remember like meeting with John Horgan, and one of the things that they said is like, oh, I'm too high up. Like, you are the premier of our province. I was like, I'm like, am I hearing this right? Like, you're too high up. I'm like, okay, well, there's no hope. Like, that would be like, oh, it's just like, it's so crazy to me because these things are happening, right? And there's people like being like, oh, this like so wild to me. I don't know if this, like the medical system, can be saved. I think it just needs to be utilized for the purpose that it was intended to be utilized for, right? Like there is a time and a place that it needs to be used for. I would say though, like the general population and most people who go to the hospital for mental health care don't need to be hospitalized, right? They need a wraparound support team. They need people that might not look like counselors, that might not look like doctors. They might look like peer support workers. They might look like elders in their community. They might look like just somebody there to listen. Like, I think that's the idea, is I kind of separate it. Like, I think we need to stop trying to fit within the system that's clearly not working for everyone and is actually causing a great deal of harm, and look at it and be like, okay, thank you. You have a job, you have a place, you have a time, and we need to create something else. And I think the problem is we're trying to create those things within this medical system. And as long as we keep doing that, like that's not going to work, because you're always going to be within the constraints of island health policies or whatever health organization you're with. And for great reason, they have these rules, right? Like when I go in for a surgery, I'm sure as heck hoping that everybody's washing their hands and masking up. But when you're in a mental health crisis, people gowning up because you might have a contagious disease isn't helpful at all, and not necessarily like, it's just, it needs to stop being in that environment. And I think that's the problem, is it's not going to be fixed if we look at it in that light.
I think, one of the things that you've been so amazing at throughout your whole journey has been connecting different people. I can safely say that that my family would not have been on the same trajectory had we not met you and Emma. You fundamentally changed the advocacy path for our family in a major way. And I know for a lot of others, it's the same story. If they hadn't met you and Emma or heard about your story, things would be very, very, very different for them. as you say, I mean, there's a whole slew of problems within the system, and how individuals are sort of operating, I guess, within it. I'm just wondering, what do you see as being the sort of tangible next steps? What do you think would really help, like the kind of low hanging fruit that you think would be easy to do, moving forward for British Columbia, and its mental health system?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think about that just makes so much sense is, and coming from a youth who went through the system, who is inpatient in one age demographic and outpatient in another age demographic, is just bridging those two. Like, it doesn't make sense to have inpatient mental health stop at 16, or end of 16, and then outpatient go until you're 19. Some organizations go until 21, some go into 25. It makes it nearly impossible to navigate the system by yourself, let alone if you have other people or loved ones who are helping you navigate. So I think that's a very tangible thing. And I think also, and I remember being in this narrative too, like when everything was going on, with our Facebook page, of like, we're all trying to work together. And I think instead of looking at like, this way is wrong, this way is wrong, this way is wrong, realizing like there is a place for everything. And I think so long as we can like coexist and all realize we have a place, and not be like fighting for funds or fighting for whatever, and just like realizing like what might not work for you is going to work for somebody else, is going to work for the next person. And so I don't know, I think I see all these movements happening, and I'm like, how can we like all work together and have a more accessible system? And I do think that's possible, because I think it is not realistic to say like, let's just get rid of the mental health system, because I don't think that's going to exist. We live within a Western society. Like, that's how they want to go about solving like these diseases, right? And I think we just need to have more resources available and more of a continuum of care. And it starts within school, with education, with like young children, and it comes with having like more funding for counselors within school, so they can have a full-time job and not needing 3 on the side, so they don't get burnt out. Like, there's just so many layers within it. But yeah, I think if we work together in some way, that would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, it really, really inspires me to hear about that movement of community and gathering and connection and storytelling, right? And just kind of like, yeah, why is there so much division, amongst the mental health advocacy world? Because I wasn't part of that. So, I just started this podcast with Kyle because, like, Kyle read articles about you, I read articles about Kyle, and I was like, oh my God, this family has been through the most horrible thing, right? And that level of like compassion that we have for each other is what led us to have these conversations. So why aren't the leaders of this province having the same compassion for the people that they're supposed to be serving? I don't know, and I don't get it. And I think that like our generation should be in the legislature. Like, I don't even know what the heck. I mean, Adam Olsen sounds awesome. I haven't met him, but he sounds really cool. But I'm just kind of at a loss where I'm just like, you people are more concerned about money and forcing people to do things and controlling the situation. Like, can't you see that it's not helping? Because they're living in a delusional reality, like, but then they're calling us delusional. So I'm like, which reality are we in? Because everyone's experience is valid on some level, and the system isn't serving us. We can all agree that the data says the system is not serving us. So this community grassroots approach is sort of like the only thing that I can think of, that, and the continuum of care, like you said, and the holistic treatment that you received when you were at Ledger. I'm like, that sounds beautiful, like bouldering walls. Like, why do we reserve this type of care for like the very young and the very old, or the dying? Like my grandmother, when she's dying in palliative care, has sound healing, has fish, has really sweet nurses that are like so present, like on the top of VGH, like looking out over this beautiful landscape, and like, wow, what an amazing place to die. But like everyone else under that is like just like really suffering.
Yeah, there is an immense amount of suffering, I think is what it comes down to. And it's so interesting because, and I think it comes from like being through struggles and not being in struggles and just realizing like everyone needs support all the time. And some people just need more support at certain parts in their life. And I think when somebody doesn't understand a concept or is more worried about money or whatever, I think my first reaction is like, F you, like if only you could understand, if only you could really feel the stories. And then it's like, you don't understand because you haven't gone through it. And while it's envious sometimes of me, I'm like, okay, like that's what we want. And so like where you are in your life, like what are the resources and support you have in your life where the struggles and the challenges you do face don't severely impact you in whatever way, and like how do we channel that and give that to other people. And I think it's just like this competitive nature of like people want to make more money, people want to be like more known, more popular, more whatever, that they're okay that other people around them are suffering. And it's so bizarre to me, like it's such a not natural thought process that I'm often like, how do people actually like, is it that they don't care? Because I feel like on a level I'm like, how could you like sit there in your like fancy chair in your fancy building and be like, money, people are dying but money, like I'm like, what the heck, like we're all gonna die, it doesn't matter how much money you have, like. But yeah, it's just we live in a very individualistic society as it comes down to, right?
I think what you say, Ella, is it's this breath of fresh air, this clarification in what is like what most people would say is a very complex landscape, and to distilling that down into just a very clear scenario it's humbling in a way to listen to. But I think you're hitting the nail on the head there on so many points. I mean, Ella, what throughout this, and every time I chat with you, I'm blown away by your optimism and your energy and your ability to go, yeah, this is what's going on. This is what we can do about it. What gives you that energy? What gives you that inspiration and that spark? It's so enthralling.
um I think it comes down to like when you've been at the lowest part in your life and to the point where like literally I'm like, I cannot go on anymore. And then I do. You have this realization like everything is so temporary, like, and this perspective of I will never, I always talk about current me and little me. And I think I will never be able to go back in time and like hold 12-year-old me while I was like too afraid to ask for help. But I can use the voice I do have now at 20 and be like, that's okay. You couldn't do it then. You can do it now. And I think being able to hopefully make this funny, chaotic world we live in like a fraction of a percent better is kind of what keeps me going. And hearing though like this idea too that when I move forward then it kind of sparks somebody else to go a little bit forward and somebody else and somebody else, like it's not me continuing, like it's like you going and then everybody else following you. And yeah, I think it definitely comes from being places and times in your life where you weren't supposed to continue, like I was not supposed to be here from everything, and I am. So, I mean, I could sit here and be crummy, and I do complain a lot of the time. Like I'm gonna complain about all the papers that I have to write, but I get a complaint about that. And I think if I looked at that without that perspective, like it would just be such a disservice to everything I went through. And I I hate when people are like, everything happens for a reason, because I think that's such BS. But like you can make meaning in everything, right? Like you can find a reason within the meaning. And I don't know, I always like whenever I was struggling, I was like, hey, if I get through this, like I don't want somebody to go through exactly what I went through. And I think now realizing like I'm not going to stop suffering from happening, but we can create a community where it's okay to talk about your suffering and it's okay to suffer, and you can lean on the people around you and they can have a better understanding of that. Because I think there were times when I went to somebody when I was in pain and they had no idea how to respond. And not only for the person that's like suffering, but the person who's receiving that, like they need the tools to hold that. And I think being able to provide that is another reason why I'm like, just gotta keep pondering, gotta keep pushing on.
I'm so, so inspired by you, and, you know, the gratitude that you have of keep pondering on and keep, you know, that when you've walked through the darkness, I can relate to this. I've been through dark places too. You sort of know that there's a light at the end. There is really an emergence of, you know, we go down, we come up, we go down, we come up. Like this is our nervous system every single day, right? And the tools that have helped me, or, you know, trauma informed tools or breath techniques, they were specific to my physiology and my ancestry and my practices. And I think if we lived in a world where we had that attitude that you just said about, we're suffering, but we can suffer together, you can lean on me, we got you, like this community has got you. We are going to do our best to be with you, and we're going to not judge you for what you're going through. I think those are just fundamental tenets of beautiful healing, um, true healing, true recovery. And I just want to really commend you and congratulate you for how far you've come, and just to tell you that life is just going to get better and better. Like I know that it did.
I
for
haven't
me.
even reached 25 yet. So I mean,
well, yeah, that lady was totally messed up. But like when I was in the thick of it, it took me 10 years to get to the place where you were at in like 9 months. So I'm just so proud of you. And I know I just met you, but I love your cat, and I love your story. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Ella, this is absolutely incredible to sit down with you, and as you say, you're slowly, perhaps in some ways, receding from the being the central focal point for commentating on mental health matters on Vancouver Island and in the province. But which actually today just makes this all the more special to have you sit down with us and chat. But I can honestly say that the province is much better than they would be otherwise without you. You have put in so much incredible wisdom into the limelight, and inspired many, including myself. And I can't wait to see where you go and what your journey looks like.
thank you. Oh, I never know how to receive compliments. I feel like maybe that's what my next journey is.
I love that. You just smile and say yes,
yes.
or thank you. Okay, well, and just last question, if anybody wants to support you or stay in touch with you or join the Facebook group, is there any way people can stay in touch with you or follow you?
Yeah, so the Facebook page, as mentioned, is Pez, a pathetic excuse for support. And yeah, I'm still on there, still poke around and stuff, but yeah, my
Beautiful.
Instagram, everything's on there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll be rooting for you. And yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.